今日のジャパニーズアニメをリードする UFO テーブルの英知が結集し紡ぎ出されたその映像は、常に進化を求め挑戦する彼らの魂そのものだ。
もう僕らのてか UFO テーブルの強みっていうのはその積み重ねだと思ってるので、コツコツコツコツ一つ一つ積み上げていくっていう。もう予告編とか CM に流れたの車のシーン、高速道路なんですけれども、あのシーンはきっとゼロの頃だと UFO テーブル作れなかったと思います。
フェイトゼロの頃には作れなかった、そう言わしめる珠玉の戦闘シーンの貴重なメイキング映像をご覧あれ。第2章3章とこれからさらなる進化を遂げていくであろう劇場版ヘブンズ・フィール。来年2月からは第1章の 4D 版上映も決定し、さらなる期待が膨らむ中、次はどんな展開で、そしていかなる映像表現であなたをどっぷりそのディープな世界に導いていくのだろう。下谷はまだその片鱗すら知らされていない。
そうですね、やっぱり第1章がそこで終わって、本当にいよいよシロとさくら、そしてその周りの人たちのヘブンズフィールの聖杯戦争がいよいよここから始まるってところで終わったので、本当にこれからどういう形で彼女の物語が描かれていくのか、私たち役者陣も本当に UFO テーブルのスタッフの皆さんに負けないぐらいの熱い気持ちで頑張って演じていきたいなって、今はもう本当にそればかり思って楽しみに待っています。
劇場版ヘブンズフィール第2章、来年公開予定。
約束する。俺は
I was just looking to understand what the process of convection is, what the structures look like, how things behave and evolve. I didn't know what was going on, and so when I looked at the visualizations, it helped me understand what was going on. And then I would talk to people who actually observe the sun, and I'd find out what they were actually seeing. My name is Robert Stein, and I'm a professor emeritus at Michigan State University in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. I guess from the very beginning, I was interested in fluid dynamics, which is how fluids behave. When we say fluids, we don't just mean water or things like that, we also mean gases. I was interested in the atmospheres of stars. I first started off doing some stuff in the evolution of stars, but again, that's sort of fluids because stars are gases, and we were interested in how they behaved. Everything I've done in my research career has used computers. I think I have worked on almost every supercomputer that has existed. I started with an IBM that had vacuum tubes and a rotating drum memory with 2,000 words of storage, not bytes, words of storage. We wrote the codes in and put it through some kind of pre-compiler, and it punched you out a new set of cards in symbolic assembly language, which you then put on the right place on the drum, so that in the time it took to execute an instruction, the drum would have rotated around once to just reach the next instruction. As the power of computers increased, two things happened. We went to do more complex problems, including more physics, and we could do them on much larger scales. If you're studying something here on Earth, you can handle it and you can run experiments to see how it behaves. In astronomy, we can't take a chunk of the sun, and so we have to observe it from a distance. All of the information we get in astronomy comes from the light that we analyze. So astronomers have become experts on getting the last little bit of information out of light. Astronomers use telescopes mainly as a big light bucket. Our eyes, only a certain amount of light can go in them. You make something that's huge, and a lot of light goes in, and the bigger it is, the more light it can collect. We use as big telescopes as we can to get as much light as we can. When you have a lot of light, you can break the light down into very narrow color bands, and so you can get a lot more information out of it. There's a side effect also for the sun, which is what I'm interested in. Because the sun is close enough, we actually see its size. If you take a picture of it with a telescope and you can enlarge it, you can look at a little piece of sun, you can see fine structures on it. We can see things on the sun that are about 70 kilometers in size right now. And we're building a new telescope that should be able to see things that are about 30 kilometers in size. And for the sun, that's really very small scale. And of course, the more information we get means there's more stuff to model, because there's new things that we see that we never expected to see. So you've got to go back and you want to model things on finer structures and shorter time scales, and so you need bigger computers that are faster that can model this thing better. If you were to just make a model without anything to compare with, you wouldn't know if it was right or wrong or nonsense. It's only by comparing the results of these simulations or models that we make with what's actually seen that we have some confidence that we're doing something right. When we say we simulate something, is we're making a model of it, but it's a model that involves solving a set of equations to figure out how this thing behaves. And those equations are solved numerically on a computer. So it's like making a model of something. You make a model of a car, or a plane, or in my case, what happens in the convection on the sun. When we get into these large-scale computations, you can't look at numbers. You can't make any sense of it. You have to picture it some way. There's lots of programs that help you do that kind of analysis. You can make one-dimensional graphs, you can make two-dimensional images. And sometimes in order to really see what's going on, you actually need a 3D picture. In this animation, our goal was to see how magnetic field comes up through the surface of the sun and what effect it has. We start by looking down on the surface of the sun, and we see a pattern of bright and dark regions. The bright regions are where it's hot, and the dark lanes around them are where that gas has cooled off and starts being pulled back down by gravity and goes back down into the interior of the sun. And then perspective dives below the surface of the sun. We're looking at the magnetic structures. What we see are visualizations of the current, and we also see field lines tracing the structure of the magnetic field. And we see that it starts off as a sort of large loop, which then breaks up into sort of little finer structures as it's rising up towards the surface. It's actually being brought to the surface by two effects. One is that it's buoyant, so it's floating up to the surface. And the other is that it's in one of these rising hot fluid columns, which is carrying it up to the surface. The convection itself is bringing it up to the surface, but it's also breaking it down into much finer structures. So as it gets near the surface, and the convection itself develops these much finer structures, you see it then coming up, and it has all of this fine filigree kind of pattern as it comes through the surface. Because it was part of this large loop of magnetic field, it has these legs which are going way down deep into the sun, and they stay there. That's what forms the active regions where you get the sunspots. It has become dark because the magnetic field in these legs has inhibited the convection from carrying heat to the surface, so it has cooled off. And when it cools off, it becomes darker. Every time I talk to people who are observing things and they give me new ideas about what I should look for, I go back and I look at things in a new way and I discover new things. Science actually makes people interested in the world around them and makes them look at what's around them and think about why things are the way they are and what makes things work the way they work. People can begin to see that it's exciting, so that young people will want to have careers in it, because if you don't have young people entering a field, it's going to die out. And also that people understand that it really makes a difference.
And leads to the next question, because a few people on the lines are asking, do you believe in God?
I'm not convinced. If here's the thing. If every time I talk about God with someone who's a believer, God is all powerful and all knowing and all good, right? The good is a big part of this. Mm-hmm. And then I look at all the ways Earth wants to kill us.
Strangle us.
You know, a tsunami takes out 250,000 people, hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, and I add all of that up. Either the God is not all powerful or is not all good. But it can't really be both, given all the ways the universe wants to kill us. And if Earth is not finished killing you, there's the asteroid that could come in. Right. That asteroid rendered 70% of all life forms extinct back in the famous one in 65 million years ago that took out the dinosaurs. So there's so many ways to die, not at the hands of someone else who has free will, that I don't know what is the nature of the God that you're talking about?
I gotta try to use your logic back at you. But don't we define what is good and what is bad? So we see a tsunami wipe out a whole bunch of people, and we're as human beings going, wow, that's bad, because we define what bad is. Maybe in God's brain, eyes, whatever the hell, that's not bad.
Well, but except you defined what God is.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Now you did it.
That's
so why do you have the power to define who and what God is,
right,
but not have the power to define what good is?
Yeah, my point is we just don't know it all. Not even close.
Oh, sure. So therefore, if you're going to say God actually is good, and 250,000 people dying from an earthquake and a tsunami and other natural disasters, right, and God presumably has control over that, and God is good, then we have to then say God works in mysterious ways, right?
There you go.
That's that. But people only say that when their understanding of God fails them.
When
right?
it's something bad.
No, when they can't understand it, they say, well, God works in mysterious ways. But somehow, in these other ways, you did understand him.
Right.
How are you saying, well, this is the handiwork of God? You're doing God's work. God wants you to do this. Somehow you know God's motives every other way. Mm-hmm. But when 250,000 people get wiped out, God works in mysterious ways. Mm-hmm. Why do you even claim to have access to God's mind in some contexts and not others?
Yeah, exactly.
Just admit you have no clue,
right,
and get on with life. That's how I look at it.
We just don't have a clue when it comes down to it.
Well, I'd like to think that preserving health and longevity, that is a nice operational definition of something that's good.
Right.
How can you argue? How can you debate something that keeps you alive and healthy? That's got to be something that's good. I can't. I refuse to allow someone to say, "I'm going to give you cancer, birth defects, and shorten your life," and somehow call that good. I'm not going there.
I hear you.
I'm not going there.
Yeah, well, I think it's those big questions. Theoretical physicists seem to come up against those throughout their entire careers.
That's why I became a theoretical physicist. I wanted to bump up against those big questions.
Constantly. And so that's another question I was really interested in, is that I've heard that the majority of theoretical physicists are incredibly spiritual and have a great appreciation for the concept of consciousness and the soul and the universe and where it came from, because these are the questions that they're constantly asking. For yourself, what's your view on life, and where is it? What are we doing when we teleport life, if we ever get to that point?
Well, if I knew the answer to life, I would have an inside track up there.
Right. As would anybody, yeah.
But let me tell you how we physicists view things, right? For example, Einstein was asked the big question, is there a God? Is there a meaning to everything, right?
Right.
And here's how Einstein answered the question. He said, there really are two kinds of gods. We have to be very scientific. We have to define what you mean by God. If God is the God of intervention, the personal God, the God of prayer, the God that parts the waters, then he had a hard time believing in that. Would God listen to all our prayers for a bicycle for Christmas and smite the Philistines for me, please?
Right.
He didn't think so. However, he believed in the God of order, harmony, beauty, simplicity, and elegance, the God of Spinoza. That's the God that he believed in, because he thought the universe was so gorgeous. It didn't have to be that way. It could have been chaotic. It could have been ugly, messy. But here we have the fact that all the equations of physics can be placed on a simple sheet of paper.
Right.
Einstein's equation is only 1 inch long. And the quantum theory is about a yard long, but you can squeeze it onto a sheet of paper.
Right, with a small enough font.
Right. And with string theory, you can even put those two equations together. And string theory can be squeezed into an equation 1 inch long. And that equation, by the way, is my equation. That's string field theory. That's my contribution.
Right.
But we want to know, well, where did that equation come from? This is what Einstein asked. Did God have a choice? Was there any choice in building a universe? When he woke up in the morning, he would say, I'm going to create a universe. I'm going to be God today. What kind of universe would I create? This is how he created much of his theories.
That scared them, because they interpret that to mean, then if this is it, there's nothing else. No God and no...
Goes up a lot. Newton even said it. He had his laws of gravity and motion, and he was explaining the moon and the planet. He was there. If that's
pointless, meaningless, and there is no God. Really hard. Einstein said the theory that eluded Einstein. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Dan Fleisch. When people hear that the subject of my new student's guide is vectors and tensors, a reasonably high percentage of them have the same question. What's a tensor? My goal for this video is to take about 12 minutes to answer that question, not using a bunch of mathematical equations, but instead some simple household objects, including children's blocks, small arrows, a couple of pieces of cardboard, and a pointed stick. I think the very best route to understanding tensors is to begin by making sure that you're solid on your understanding of vectors. If you've taken any college-level physics or engineering, you probably think of a vector as something like this: an arrow representing a quantity that has both magnitude and direction, wherein the length of the arrow is proportional to the magnitude of the quantity, and the orientation of the arrow tells you the direction of the quantity. This could represent the force of gravity on an object, or the strength and direction of the Earth's magnetic field, or the velocity of a particle in a flowing fluid. But vectors can represent other things as well, such as an area. How does a vector represent an area? It's pretty straightforward. You simply make the length of the vector proportional to the amount of the area, the number of square meters in the area. And then you make the direction of the arrow perpendicular to the surface. So, in that way, this can represent an area as well. So vectors can represent lots of things. But if you want to take the step beyond thinking of vectors as representing quantities with magnitude and direction, to understanding that vectors are members of a wider class of object called tensors, then you have to make sure you understand vector components and basis vectors. If you're even going to think about the components of a vector, you better get yourself one of these. This represents a coordinate system. In this case, I've picked the simplest one: an x-axis, a y-axis, and a z-axis, all meeting at right angles. This represents the Cartesian coordinate system. And the thing to remember about coordinate systems is they come along with coordinate basis vectors. You probably ran into these as unit vectors. vectors. And the thing to remember about these little guys is they have a length of 1. 1 what? 1 of whatever the units are that you're going to express the length of your vector in. And the direction of the basis vectors, or unit vectors, is in the direction of the coordinate axes. So this might represent the unit vector in the x direction. That's often called x with a little hat over it, or sometimes I hat. That's the x hat unit vector. It points in the direction of increasing x coordinate. Likewise, the y hat, sometimes called the j hat unit vector, points in the direction of increasing y. And the z hat, or k hat unit vector, points in the direction of increasing z. Once you have the coordinate system and the unit vectors in place, now you're in a position to find the components of your vector. But how exactly do you do that? I think it's easiest to understand how to find vector components if you begin with a vector in the xy plane. So I'm going to lay this vector in the xy plane at some angle to the x-axis. In order to find the x component, I'm going to project this vector onto the x-axis. In order to find the y component, I'm going to project this vector onto the y-axis. And how am I going to do those projections? Here's one way. I've darkened the room because I'm going to use this lamp to project the vector onto the x and y axes. First, I'm going to shine the light perpendicular to the x-axis, that is parallel to the y-axis, and look for the shadow of the vector on the x-axis. That will be the x component of this vector. As you can see, the shadow of the vector on the x-axis ends right here. This is the x component of this vector. If I made the vector have a greater angle to the x-axis, notice the shadow moves this way. The x component is getting smaller. And if I make the vector lay entirely along the x-axis, then the shadow and the vector are the same length. The x component is the length of the vector in that case. Now I've got my light shining perpendicular to the y-axis, that is parallel to the x-axis, and the shadow cast by the vector onto the y-axis gives me the y component of the vector. Notice that as I increase the angle to the x-axis, I'm decreasing the angle to the y-axis, and the y component is getting bigger. Another way of visualizing vector components is to ask yourself, to get from the base of the vector to the tip of the vector, how far do I have to go in the x direction, and how far do I have to go in the y direction? In other words, how many x hat or I hat unit vectors and how many y hat or j hat unit vectors would it take to get from the base to the tip of this vector? I can show you this if I get rid of these axes and just line up some x hat basis vectors. These are going to go in the x direction, obviously.